We examine how few of the geopolitical realities actually support the president's unilateral decision. Also, the Pentagon confirms that China has transported and positioned weapons on one of the artificial islands that it's building in disputed waters in the South China Sea. American surveillance aircraft detected two large artillery vehicles on the Chinese-built island, raising concerns the Chinese plan to use the land reclamation projects for military purposes. And that revelation comes as Defense Secretary Ash Carter is in the region for an international security summit in Singapore, at which he is expected to demand that China immediately stop those projects. Perhaps China has taken some note of how empty Obama White House threats, red lines, and ultimatums have been over the years. We'll see. What will be the consequences of another reckless Obama foreign policy decision? We'll be asking General Jack Keane. We begin with the Obama administration rolling back decades of U.S. foreign policy across the globe. It's not just Cuba and China benefiting. Just a day after the White House said the United States will not be responsible for Iraq's security, the Islamic State claimed responsibility for bombings at two hotels in Baghdad. And in Russia, Vladimir Putin taking advantage of Mr. Obama's flexibility, conducting surprise military exercises in the Barents Sea as NATO is holding its own military exercises. Joining us now to discuss the consequences of the president's decisions, former Army Vice Chief of Staff, Fox News military analyst, General Jack Keane. General, good to have you here. It seems an appropriate question tonight. Has the president simply decided that every president over the last half century has been wrong on Cuba, wrong on Europe and Russia and China?
Yeah, what's been unfolding here these last few years is nothing short of stunning, to watch these geopolitical policy decisions that the president is making. And certainly this one with Cuba is remarkably similar to what he was doing with Iran. He believes that a peaceful overture in Iran nuclear negotiations will lead to Iran joining the community of nations as a result of a decision on those negotiations. He believes that Cuba, by giving them diplomatic recognition and supporting their endeavors in the region, will somehow get this communist, totalitarian, repressive regime to join the community of nations. I mean, there is nothing that supports that. All of our allies, none of our allies agree with it, and it's arrogant and it's naive to watch this unfold.
And in the Middle East, the president seemingly acquiescing to Iranian demands in negotiations over nuclear weapons limitations, which will amount to effectively to 2 to 3 months, a breakout period, whatever the result of that discussion, if it does lead to an agreement. What are we to make of what is unfolding in Iraq? The decision announced as, sort of retroactively that the president had decided not to degrade and not to destroy the Islamic State.
Well, I think this week has been very revealing. I'm sure as there have been numerous meetings on with the national security apparatus dealing with the aftermath of Ramadi. What the administration seems to be saying to us is that they're distancing themselves from Iraq because of recent failures, particularly Ramadi, and they're finding words to retool this relationship. I find that really disappointing, obviously, because while what's taken place in Iraq certainly has relationship to us since 2003, our interest in Iraq is not just about Iraq. It's about the United States' interest in the region, the security of the American people, and our interest for the stability of the Middle East. And that is critical to us. And it appears that the president is beginning to walk away from Iraq as part of what he's done in disengaging from the Middle East.
As he walks away from Iraq, the fight with the Islamic State, what are the implications here for example, the ambitions and the aggression, the annexation of Crimea, the threats toward Scandinavia, Eastern Europe by Vladimir Putin? Does this president and his passivity render NATO effectively a shell organization now?
Well, you know, most of us looking at this, the policy decisions the president has made and the implications it's had in the region and how our adversaries are taking advantage of it, we connect those dots. And we absolutely see the relationship of the adversarial relationship of Iran, of ISIS, of Putin, of China, all taking advantage of the United States' weak American power and weak American leadership. And that is going to continue, sadly, right up until this administration ends. And what he's going to turn over to the next president is going to be very significant in terms of our security challenges around the world.
This president, his administration, talked of a pivot to Asia at the time, trying to deflect from Iraq and the disastrous policies, whether they are Libya, whether Syria, that the president has been woefully inept in carrying out, particularly over the past year. But this pivot to Asia, now Ash Carter, the defense secretary, is in Singapore for an international security conference at which the Chinese will have officials. And this defense secretary is going to continue, I would assume, to bluster about what will happen to the Chinese if they continue to build these artificial islands and deploy weapons to them. I mean, it's impossible to imagine the Chinese would take that as even slightly credible on the part of this administration.
Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, the Chinese saw the rhetoric surrounding the pivot to Asia, which was really camouflage for disengaging from the Middle East, which was the real policy decision. And then the pivot to Asia had no capabilities that went along with it. In terms of military capabilities and diplomatic effort to change the dimension of what China was trying to achieve. You know, China now, it's clear, has moved from a defensive military strategy to a regional offensive strategy to seek domination of the Western Pacific and the South China Sea, largely at the expense of the United States and our allies. I mean, they were covering that for some time as they were beginning to build a higher capacity military, but now it's right out in the open. They don't hide it from anybody. And I think they're pursuing their own national interests regardless of what the United States is doing, and that's true of most nations. But they are clearly taking advantage of American power weakness, and they know that this is rhetoric because they've seen it dealing with Putin, they've seen it dealing with Iran, they've seen it, as you point out, dealing with Cuba, and they've certainly now seen it even more so with ISIS. So this is a huge pattern where you can connect the dots of American power weakness.
General Jack Keane, thank you. Appreciate it.